Today we begin the final installment of Island Book 3 Escape by Gordon Korman. We will begin on chapter 19, page 119. Day 28, 8:50 a.m. "Row!" bellowed Luke. He and Charla splashed through the waist to deep surf, pushing the loaded lifeboat out to sea. On board, Ian and Lissa heaved at the oars, propelling the covered raft into the oncoming breakers. The tide was going out, but the seas were rougher than usual. Every time they made any progress, a powerful wave would take hold of the craft and send it careening back toward the island. Will's cries of pain resounded from the raft. With the wild pitching of the sea, it was impossible to keep his injured leg immobilized. "We're hurting him," shouted Lissa, her voice barely audible over the pounding of the surf. "Let's try again when the ocean calms down." "No," exclaimed Ian. "We make our move when we've got the tide." A breaker hit Luke in the face. He came up sputtering. He would have been overjoyed to postpone their departure until conditions were better, but the smugglers could already be on their way back to the island. Waiting an extra day might be fatal. "I hate this place," raged Charla. "Getting here almost killed us, and getting away is going to finish the job." Suddenly, the raft was in the grasp of a monster swell. For a few breathless seconds, it teetered on the crest, looming over Luke, threatening to come down and crush him. He was frozen, powerless to move, staring up at the terrified face of Will, who stared back at him through the flap of the sun canopy. "After all I've survived," Luke thought ruefully, "I'm going to be drowned by my own lifeboat." His eyes searched out the telltale foam that meant the wave was about to break. It never came. Instead, the raft bobbed up to the top of the swell and disappeared down the other side. The moving mountain of water rolled over Luke and Charla, driving them under. Luke floundered, kicking for the light. When he surfaced, choking and spitting, he looked desperately around for the lifeboat. Charla pointed. "Out there!" Luke stared. In only a handful of seconds, the raft was 40 feet away. Now, free of the incoming surf, it was being pulled out to sea by a relentless undertow. The rowers, Leon and Lissa and Ian, were paddling like mad to slow things down. Their efforts had no effect at all on the drag of the ocean. "Swim for it," called Luke, launching himself through the waves. Charla took off, cutting through the water like a cabin cruiser. Her powerful arms churning, she passed Luke and bore down on the raft. Still swimming, he saw her heave herself up over the side. It was only then that he realized how very far the boat still was, and how tired and heavy his arms and legs felt. An overwhelming isolation gripped him. If he couldn't reach the raft, he'd have to swim back to shore. Then he'd be marooned alone. "Never," he vowed to himself. "I won't go back there. If I can't reach the others, I'll drown right here and now." The thought was a booster rocket. His arms windmilled wildly. His legs manufactured the strength to kick on. He could barely hear the shouts of the others over the pounding of his own heart in his ears. He closed his eyes and swam blindly. If he looked and saw the lifeboat pulling away, it would mean there was no hope. Splash. Something hit the water inches from his face. He pulled up and his arm smacked right into it, the raft's life preserver. He barely had the energy to clamp himself onto it. Charla and Lissa hauled in the rope, pulling him alongside the raft. Even hanging onto the edge of the sun canopy, he was too exhausted to climb onto the lifeboat. Instead, he allowed himself to be towed for 20 minutes before working up the strength to accept his friend's help and clamber aboard. What came next had been carefully scripted. The paddles were tied into the oarlocks, pointing straight up. Between them was stretched the makeshift sail. Next, the flat wooden raft that had served as Will's hospital bed was maneuvered out the flap of the sun canopy and dropped over the side. It contained 46 shelled coconuts tied tightly in place under a blanket taken from the military base. It bobbed in tow behind the lifeboat. Totally spent, Luke found an empty space and slumped back. Even with the coconut stash trailing behind, there was more food than people on the lifeboat. Wedged between the bunches of finger bananas and the sacks of roast and durian seeds, he fell into a deep sleep. 6 hours. For the first time, the island was completely out of sight. Once again, the castaways found themselves at the mercy of the sea. "Why didn't I remember how much I hate bobbing around the ocean?" mumbled Charla. "Maybe I would have had the brains to stay back on dry land and take my chances with the smugglers." Luke regarded Lissa. The girl had suffered from terrible seasickness while on the Phoenix. Now her face was a telltale shade of oatmeal. "Hey," he said kindly, "no one's going to get on your case if you have to hang your head over the side. Just don't barf on the coconuts," Will added weakly. She cast him a withering glare. Big talk from the guy who bled on everybody here. Liz, but his sister's queasiness bubbled up inside her. With a strangled gurgle, she headed for the flap. She threw the canopy wide, then dropped back among them with a scream of shock. Luke grabbed her by the shoulders. "What? What?" The raft lurched and dipped to one side. A moment later, the head and shoulders of a man in a short-sleeved hooded wetsuit were thrust through the opening. The effect was so stupefying that the castaways were turned to stone. Luke's gaping disbelief changed abruptly to terror as his mind made the jump from bewilderment to explanation. The smugglers had tracked them down. This frogman was here to kill them. He grabbed wildly for a weapon and came up with a heavy bunch of finger bananas. He reared back to take a murderous swing. "U.S. Marines," barked a commanding voice from behind the goggles. "Drop those bananas." He rumbled and laughed into a stunned silence. "I never thought I'd get a chance to say that." He spoke into a tiny mouthpiece that stuck out of his rubberized helmet. "Swimmer to base." "Got him." From his belt, he pulled a razor-sharp 8-inch hunting knife. With a powerful sweep, he slashed through the sun canopy from one side to the other. "Would you shut my door?" I'm going to move for just a minute and shut the door so that we don't miss out on the rest of us. Okay? Be right back. Sorry, people were in the hall talking. From his belt, he pulled a razor-sharp 8-inch hunting knife. With a powerful sweep, he slashed through the sun canopy from one side to the other. Blinding light streamed in as the cover fell away, exposing the lifeboat to brilliant blue sky. A roar from above drew 5 sets of dazzled eyes. A massive helicopter was moving into position over them. Charlotte was the first to speak. Her voice was so shrill and full of disbelief that it was almost unrecognizable. We're rescued?" The instant the word was out of her mouth, she began to cry. Each in turn, Lisa, Ian, Will, and Luke, gave in to the juggernaut of emotion. 28 days marooned, a week adrift before that, suffocated with danger and fear, surrounded by death, and now, just like that, it was all over. It seemed almost unreal. The chopper lowered a cable to the swimmer. "Take my brother first," begged Lisa, "and watch out for his bad leg." The Marine fastened the stripes around Will. The boy turned his tear-streaked face to his fellow castaways. "You did it, guys. You got me out." Then he was gone and winched up to the helicopter where waiting hands pulled him aboard. Luke's mind was in a fog as he watched the others drawn up to safety. "I'm going home." Tentatively, he turned the idea over. It had been so long that he didn't really think of home very much anymore. It was even hard to picture his room or his parents' faces. "Okay, kid," said the swimmer. "Last customer." Luke allowed himself to be strapped into the harness. It was almost too easy. A kind of cheating. 5 weeks of terror and struggle, and then a helicopter comes along. A get-out-of-jail-free card. He felt a pang of grief. If only all of them could have been here to play it. His ascent to the chopper was faster than he expected. 2 Marines dragged him aboard and ripped the harness from him. He looked around for the others, but saw only one face, a $1 million smile behind custom-made designer sunglasses. "I came back for you, Haggerty," said JJ in an injured voice. "You weren't there." Luke grabbed him by the collar. "The smugglers?" "In jail," beamed the actor's son, "and they're already looking for Radford." Luke shook his head in amazement. "I can't believe you did it." "Well, I had a little help." Luke frowned. "From who?" In answer, JJ pulled off his shades and waved them in Luke's face. The inscription on the earpiece flashed in the sun. "Jonathan Lane, the toast of London, P.S." Luke was impatient. Yeah, you've got great sunglasses. Come on, how'd you get away from the smugglers?" "The guy they had guarding me tried to sell my shades," JJ explained, "and the pawn shop owner wanted proof the inscription was legit. He got in touch with my dad's office, and they called the FBI." "But how did they know where to find you?" "The cops squeezed it out of my guard," JJ grinned. "It was the glasses, Haggerty. I told you they were special." Luke stared at the one-of-a-kind shades. He had always hated them. They were the ultimate symbol of JJ's cocky Hollywood attitude. Never could he have imagined that they would save all their lives. The chopper crew hauled the swimmer in through the door and sealed the sliding hatch. The helicopter banked southwest, heading back to its base. "Guam in 40 minutes, the pilot called to the castaways. "You mean we're not going to the island?" Luke asked anxiously. The swimmer put a hand on his arm. "Whatever you left there, I'm sure your folks will get you a new one." "It's not what we left," insisted Luke. "It's what you left." "Us?" The pilot turned around to regard him. "We weren't even there." "Not now," Luke informed him. "In 1945. You forgot your atomic bomb." September 3rd, 1945, 18:05 hours. The tropical sun set on an island of impatience. The transport plane was loaded. Airmen jammed their hands in their pockets and tried not to fidget. The war was over. They should have left hours ago. What was the holdup? Still hanging from the broken crane, Junior, the third atomic bomb, had been opened like a 5-ton cookie jar. Sergeant Holliday and Corporal Connerly watched as a technician removed 2 pieces of radioactive uranium that provided Junior's nuclear fuel. For the most destructive weapon humankind had ever devised, the trigger was astonishingly simple. At detonation, the smaller uranium slug would be fired into the larger bowl-shaped piece to set off a nuclear blast strong enough to destroy an entire city. It seemed scarcely more technical than starting a fire by rubbing 2 sticks together. The uranium pieces were packed in separate lead-lined containers. Next, the detonator was removed, an ordinary gun barrel hooked up to an altimeter. The components were put in the back of a truck to be driven to the airstrip and loaded onto the plane. Holliday stared as a technician stepped into the flatbed of the truck to accompany the nuclear material. "Wait a minute. Where are you going? What about the bomb?" The man patted the lead-lined containers. "The real bomb's in here, Sarge. That," he pointed to the shell of Junior, "is a very expensive paperweight." And the truck drove off. Holliday was annoyed. Well, what are we supposed to do with it? Connerly surveyed the small crowd of airmen that had gathered around the bomb pit. "Anybody got a piece of paper?" Epilogue. When the 6 young people entered the lab, they were dressed in identical Air Force coveralls. This seemed completely appropriate because the military doctors had never before seen such a close-knit group. They demanded adjoining hospital rooms, ate every single meal together, and stayed up until all hours of the night watching the Discovery Channel in the lounge. They could not seem to get enough of one another's company and conversation. Later in the afternoon, they were scheduled to fly to Hawaii, where their parents would be waiting to welcome them back from the dead. But that morning, they were the guests of the highest-ranking general on Guam. He had declared that these 6, of all people, had the right to be present for this procedure. The 6 took their front row VIP seats. They seemed fit enough, although they were thin and very sunburned. One of them was on crutches. Their eyes were focused on the concrete floor where the atomic bomb lay, its long body extending the 3/4 of the way across the lab. The operation began. Physicists and technicians cut their way through the black metal and removed a large piece of the rounded side. They cut through and removed a large piece of the rounded side. The chief scientist beckoned the 6 forward. They approached gingerly. This was, after all, an atomic bomb, the most awesome man-made force of all time. It had scared them when they first stumbled across it on the island. It scared them now. The compartment was empty, except for one small item. It had a yellowed sheet of paper that had been torn from a loose-leaf notebook. On it, in faded ink, someone had written a single word: kaboom. The flash of the reporter's camera captured the moment. 6 castaways seized by the kind of laughter that could only come from those who had not truly laughed for a very long time. That picture made it to the front page of every newspaper in the world. On September 12, 2001, Calvin Radford, former mate of the Phoenix, was arrested in a waterfront bar in Macau. He was charged with 6 counts of attempted murder. On October 23, 2001, the International Geographical Commission made an addition to their map of the Pacific, a tiny K at latitude 17 degrees 31 minutes north, longitude 157 degrees 42 minutes east. They called it Junior Island. On December 28, 2001, the 6 castaways held their first reunion at the Los Angeles home of movie star Jonathan Lane. They did not go to the beach. The end.